Բարի երեկո, սիրելի եղբայրներ, քույրեր, հայրենակիցներ, ինչպես ամեն երեքշաբթի երեկո կմիանանք ուղի եթերով, այսօր պիտի ունենանք շատ կարևոր հաղորդաշարը, խոսելով անգլերեն եւ հայերեն լեզվով, շատ կարևոր հյուրում ունենք մեր Skype-ի վրա ստուդիոյիններ, San Antonio-ին, Mark Dankof, նախկին senator-ի candidate եւ մեծ անձնավորությունը, որ political analysis-ներ գնա եւ քրիստոնյա pastor մնա, որ այսօր իրեն հետ պիտի խոսենք շատ կարևոր հարգավոր նյութի մասին, որ ինչ կկատարվի, որ այսօր աշխարհի շուրջը։ Եվ առաջին հարցումս, որ պիտի դամ նախ պիտի խոսիմ հայերեն, որ բոլորը հասկանաք։ Առաջին հարցումս, որ պիտի դամ այս բոլոր պատերազմները, որ կկատարվի այսօր կլսենք իսրայելյաններ, միլիցիաներ, ինչպես Պաղեստինի վրա գարցակին, ինչպես Սուրիոյ մեջի պատերազմները, Իրաքի մեջի պատերազմները, վերջո շատ մեծ դրամական հարցեր կան, pipeline-ներով եւ յուղային հարցեր։ Իմ հարցումս որ պիտի դամ, ինչ կապ ունի այդ փոքր երկիրը, որ բոլոր էկոնոմիին աշխարհի կոնտրոլ պիտի նաբակային, ըստ նոր գդագարանի մարգարեական խոսքերուն եւ կտեսնանք որ այսօր ինչ կգադարվի որ մեր աչքերուն արչեւ։ Ուրեմն պիտի անցնի մեր անգամեն անգլերեն։ Mark Dankof, thank you for one more time taking our invitation and being on our show.
Always glad to be with Bedros Hajian and always glad to be with the International Christian Family Network because we can talk about political perspectives and current events perspectives from the biblical point of view, which I think is ultimately the truth point of view. And presumably what we do here increases people's discernment tonight as we look at things going on and that are going to be going on in the days ahead.
Right. First question I would like to start with. We know all these exploding situations all of a sudden taking place all over the world. And we call it a new world order. The war against the old war against the new world order. Of course, the old war was not that gracious either, but we had some freedom in it. But we see how interestingly things are changing very fast. The ISIS group, the terrorism. Now we see. All of a sudden the war in Gaza and the war in Israel and Palestine. And we can presume only one thing, assuming all these pipeline wars that are going around, that is going to be controlled by the center of the world, future center of the world, of course. Prophetically, we could say the Temple of Solomon, which is going to be in control of the economy in order to control people. I would like to take your analysis on this little bit, please.
Well, I think it's very important that people understand that according to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, Jerusalem is going to be at the center of this new world order and in this whole business of world government. And of course, we believe, as those who have not been bought off by this dispensational premillennial heresy that has been going on since the 19th century, that the modern state of Israel is not the Israel of God where Jesus Christ is concerned. And we believe, of course, that the establishment of the modern state of Israel is one of the most deceptive things of our time. Mm-hmm. Deceptive because it is premised on some things that are nowhere to be found in Jesus' conception of the kingdom of God. And when we start looking more deeply at this whole issue of end times prophecy, clearly, when you look at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and the appearance of the so-called man of perdition, who is also known as the Antichrist or the beast of Revelation chapter 13, right, that he will take his seat in a reconstructed temple in Jerusalem. And understanding this properly, it's amazing the number of people who call themselves Christian Zionists who think that this whole business of the modern state of Israel is just absolutely wonderful, that we should worship the modern state of Israel, do its bidding in anything that it wants to do, and that rebuilding the temple, so to speak, on the so-called Temple Mount grounds is something that people like John Hagee and Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson, among others, have supported for many, many years. Now, you can say, and I would agree, that at one level it is a fulfillment of biblical prophecy, but not in the way that these gentlemen and their followers say that it is. It's basically going to usher in something that is not good, but something that is both evil and deceptive, and that is at the heart of the so-called New World Order or world government or global system that the Bible indicates will be ruled by Satan and by by the beast and the false prophet in the final days of world history.
Well, what the Bible is prophesying, what it has been talking about, is pretty much we've seen it. It has become truth. We see the revelation has spoken the truth 2,000 years ago, approximately, and we see the outcome of what's taking place right now. Absolutely, we can see with our own eyes and hear it with our own ears. Unfortunately, some people are too busy with political analysis or political situations that they're not going to wake up. Of course, there are good people out there who want to find out the truth, but if you don't interconnect it with prophetic word that we've known and that it has foretold what's taking place, we will never understand what's taking place unless we're just going to hate each other, one side from the other side. So, go ahead.
Well, I think that's absolutely correct. And to me, of all the New Testament data that is out there on prophecy, the Olivet Discourse comes to mind. That's found in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. We certainly see the evidence in the Petrine epistles, the writings of Peter, and we certainly see evidence in Paul's writings, both in 1 Thessalonians 4 and 2 Thessalonians 2, especially, where this whole business of the Antichrist is discussed in great detail. And then obviously we get into the Apocalypse, that material that John wrote, known as the Book of Revelation, on the island of Patmos between 81 and 96 AD during the reign of the Roman Emperor Domitian. We see that when you evaluate all of that data, that certain political events that have taken place in my lifetime and the things that seem to be speeding up in timetable now can only be properly understood by those who take a look at this biblical material and understand the biblical roadmap that enables us to understand the deeper implications of all of this.
Mark, it's very interesting because the theological seminaries and theology has been around for years and years, and we have pastors that define theology as worshiping the state instead of worshiping Christ itself. It's very interesting. Why would you think, what's your analysis on most of the pastors, why don't they speak the truth about what's taking place right now around the world? Because it's the events of the prophecy, what we've been waiting for, what we have heard in the past. What's your take on that?
Well, I think if we get into the whole issue of why John was exiled to Patmos by the Roman Emperor Domitian, we can put this in proper perspective. The fact of the matter is that the Roman Emperor Domitian was demanding that he be venerated as the virtual incarnation of God on earth. In other words, that he was virtually Jesus Christ in his understanding of how people should worship him. King Nebuchadnezzar had this same issue in the book of Daniel.
Right.
We demand that people worship this 90-foot tall obelisk that he commanded be constructed and erected in the plain of Dura. So whether you're looking at Nebuchadnezzar or you're looking at Domitian or some of these other evil people in world history, the fact of the matter is that there is a very sordid history of acquiescence on the part of people in religious circles, acquiescence on the part of people in different governments to these evil movements and to these demagogues in order that they might, in their own minds, save themselves from whatever suffering and tribulation would occur if they were to oppose what people like Nebuchadnezzar and Domitian are pushing. We see this in spades now when it comes to, in the United States, both the Israeli lobby. We also see it in terms of this doctrine of American exceptionalism, where with all of the biblical warnings that are out there in regard to the dangers of worshiping Caesar, the dangers of being deceived, the dangers of confusing the kingdom of God in Christ with secular kingdoms, which are always corruptible, the fact of the matter is that so many so-called Christian churches in the United States and in the West are essentially bowing down to Caesar. They're acquiescing to their governments on the basis of a false understanding of Romans chapter 13 and some of the material that is presented in the Petrine epistles. And I also think that there's a certain amount of cowardice involved in this too. In the U.S., for example, most churches are so-called 501c3 organizations.
Right.
And pastors want to maintain their own tax breaks, and they want to maintain the tax exemptions for their churches. They basically are, in so many cases, are working with congregations filled with people like this, who are themselves either afraid of Caesar, so to speak, or who are basically guilty of what used to be called Caesaro-papism, basically worshiping the Caesar that happens to be around at any given point in time as the virtual incarnation of God, which is the very thing, of course, that Domitian was demanding of John in the first century. So when you look at these so-called Christian churches today, most of them have been politically and culturally and theologically emasculated. It does not matter whether it's the abortion issue, the homosexual issue, the issue of the encroachment on the freedom of the church on the part of Caesar and the state. Most of these people are sheep who have simply gone along with whatever these demagogues and governments have insisted be done from time to time. And so effectively, I would say that in the United States and in the Western world generally, that so-called Christian churches have largely ceased to be salt. Most of them have become a very convenient part of the evil system that the Bible warned us would crystallize and coalesce at the end of history. And in so many cases, these pastors and these churches are more conversant with Caesaro-papism than they are biblical Christianity because of the cost that's involved if one ends up having to suffer for it, or if one ends up having to lose a livelihood over it, or ultimately to be incarcerated or even to be killed. I mean, this is in effect a repudiation of the faith of Paul, the faith of Peter, the faith of John, and others who stood up to the ancient Roman Empire and who stood up to the synagogue of Satan in the first century and were willing to give their lives for the gospel. We're not seeing that today, at least in the Western churches by and large, where most of these pastors are absolutely too chummy with the secular state and too chummy with the secular political and corporate forces that can make your life very easy or make your life very difficult according to what you're preaching and teaching.
Right. Absolutely. So we see the first century Christianity. It's very important to emphasize on the first century Christianity, where preachers, apostles were constantly under attack, and they were prosecuted, they were killed, their heads were cut off, and we understand there was a difference between then and now, and the difference was they did not want to worship the same Christ in the same temples that the other religions did. Do I understand that right?
Well, yes, this whole thing with religious syncretism has been a danger throughout world history. You go back and look at the things that led ultimately to the demise and the fortunes of Israel after the time of the United Monarchy. The things that began to happen under Solomon accelerated after his death, and you ended up having Israel divided into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. We understand that there was a very long process of decline in the northern kingdom between 931 roughly and 722 BC, when the northern kingdom of Israel and his capital city of Samaria were destroyed by the Assyrians.
Right.
Then you look at the southern kingdom of Judah, and of course it was largely the same period of decline. And as I was saying to someone today on Facebook, between the death of the last righteous king of Judah, King Josiah, in 609 BC, it was not a very long period of time at all before the Babylonian exilic experience began with the first diaspora in 597 BC. There was, of course, a second diaspora, and then finally the crown crowning blow was in 586 BC with Nebuchadnezzar's destruction of the temple. The fact of the matter is that when you look at those situations with the northern and southern kingdoms in the Old Testament, or you're looking at Jesus' prophetic material in the Olivet Discourse, basically prophesying in Matthew 24 that 40 years after his death, that there would be a great destruction of the temple. And of course, the Romans fulfilled that prophecy of Jesus in AD 70. And it's important that we understand, both in the case of these empires in the Old and New Testament, as well as what we are seeing throughout history right up to the present time, that there are reasons why empires rise and fall. And when we look at the United States today, when we look at the Western world generally, where Christianity historically has had a lot more impact than it's having now, there are noticeable parallels between what is happening in the United States and in Europe and what was happening in these situations that have just been cited in the Old and the New Testament. And when we understand these principles that we can extract from what the Bible tells us went on in the 8th century and in the 6th century BC and in the 1st century AD, then the apocalypse of John on Patmos makes all the sense in the world in regard to what believers, true believers in Jesus Christ, are going to be required to endure in the final times of history, and the extent to which we are going to be a distinct minority. The fact of the matter is that when you look at this new world order that is in the process of coming together before our very eyes, the vast majority of people, and Revelation 13 tells us this, will be very enamored of the beast. They will love the beast. They will worship the beast.
That's right.
They will be deceived by the false supernatural signs and wonders performed by his false prophet, and that ultimately Satan, or the dragon, according to Revelation 13, stands behind all of this. This satanic deception that John foretold 21 centuries ago, is the satanic deception that is unfolding before our very eyes in regard to the banking system, in regard to the globalism, in regard to the drugs, in regard to the sexual perversion, and all the rest of it.
Right. We're going to get that sexual perversion very soon on that topic, because it's very important to even talk about that. But before we get there, the word Antichrist is left off of our preachings and of our churches, because the essential point is people of this world need to understand this is a war between two dimensional powers, let's put it this way: righteous, godly power and demonic powers. And it's hard to see unless those theologians that supposed to explain would explain. Unfortunately, they're not explaining, because as I see this whole pipeline wars that they're talking about, and they've been talking about, Iranian pipeline is going from one side to another, Russian pipeline is going from one side to another. It's an energy war from Azerbaijan to Israel, and all these wars that in the name of pipelines, they're destroying countries. It's not that simple. It's there's more into it, and the more into it is, I would emphasize specifically, the whole pipeline wars have to go through Israel in order this Antichrist Satan controls the world economy and puts control over the people. And we see the very theory is coming true into reality. It's not a theory anymore. It's not a prophecy anymore. But we see it coming into reality right in front of our eyes. Of course, this last few months has changed all of a sudden, and we hear there is a big energy war in Gaza right now. I'm sure you heard about it. They found out big time gas, natural gas places, and they're killing innocent individuals in the name of democracy, in the name of the very organization Hamas. They created it. Let's put it this way, the terroristic organization. And all of a sudden, we see all these powers uniting together in the name of in the name of their God, Antichrist. Unfortunately, that's what we're going to. And on the other side, we see this side of the world. All of a sudden, for this couple of days, we hear all these news about pornography, porn arrests all over Disney, SeaWorld, Studio City, Universal Studios, all those individuals that have been interconnected with child pornography, which is a very, very dark world again that we see nobody has ever talked about. Few times I've talked about it, but in general, people are scared to talk about it, or they're unaware about it because they go about their business and worship money. I would like to little bit emphasize on this specific things that are going on around us right here, where people take their children into Disneyland, Universal Studios, SeaWorld to have fun. And now we find out it's perversion, unfortunately, and employees are perverted there. Even one is too much, let's put it this way, because the roots are perverted. What would you have to say about that?
Well, I think the Bible is very clear in Ephesians chapter 6 that we are not wrestling with flesh and blood. We are dealing with powers, with principalities, with spiritual wickedness in high places, Paul tells us. In other words, the demonic realm. And when we're dealing with the demonic realm, the whole area of sexual perversion has always been one of Satan's chief weapons in the infiltration and undermining of any area that you choose to look at in world history. There seems to be a very strong connection today between the New World Order and globalism on the one hand and sexual perversion on the other, borrowing some of the most perverted things that we know about from some of these cultures, ancient cultures that are talked about in the Old Testament. The Assyrians and the Babylonians are just two that come to mind. Certainly there was sexual perversion in the ancient Roman Empire and so forth and so on. But when we start looking at this as a modern phenomenon, or the modern version of this very ancient phenomenon, I should say, it's very apparent that Lasha Darkmoon is correct. Some of the things that she's written for the Occidental Observer that are reproduced in her own online column, Michael Jones has published a couple of these for the Roman Catholic community and Culture Wars. She speaks about the targeted character of this perversion. Not simply dealing here with a profit motive. We have to understand, first of all, who is behind most of this sexual perversion in the United States historically. That's one thing that Christian Zionists don't want to look at all. That's one thing we could talk about tonight. The other is that clearly there's a lot of money to be made in this, and wherever there's a lot of money, it seems that Satan always lurks there. But thirdly, sexual perversion, much like the drug industry, has more than a mere profit motive involved. As Lasha Darkmoon emphasizes, it is a targeted weapon. It is a weapon that is designed to target societies, to target constituencies within societies, and to subvert traditional morality, and to subvert societies and groupings in any given society that have any version of historic Christian or historic Western Christian morality in a variety of different areas. And with that type of subversion, utilizing sex as a means of obsessing people with this whole business of sex and sexual perversion, it saps people of their will. It makes them a passive people. Much like is the case with the drug industry, people become so obsessed with getting the next fix, or having the adrenaline rush, or moving on to the next phase of whatever their satanic addiction is, be it sex or drugs or both.
Right.
That there are very malleable people who can be manipulated very easily and brought into virtually anything that the New World Order wants them to be brought into, as long as their perversions and their drug addictions are satisfied. The Bible is very, very clear about this, that this is demonic, and that Satan has used it historically and presently to infiltrate and to take over societies. And Lasha Darkmoon and E. Michael Jones and Kevin McDonald are among the people that have demonstrated that this so-called Frankfurt School and
Right.
the Institute of Social Research of the Frankfurt School in the Weimar Republic in Germany and in Vienna, Austria, was very much involved in destroying traditional Christian morality in Europe decades ago, and that some of the key figures in this movement migrated to the United States during and after World War II, so that whether we're looking at homosexual and lesbian perversion or every brand of adultery and fornication that's out there, abortion on demand, bestiality, child pornography, all of these other things, again, these are not simply money makers for evil people. This is a way of destroying the individual souls of people and a good way of destroying the collective soul of a society that at one time was at least somewhat informed by the older biblical morality.
Absolutely right on the track, as they say. Now, what is the next generation, or how is the next generation going to wake up unless there is a spiritual awakening, which we are after theology instead of the Spirit of God. Unfortunately, that's what I see. After, as you said, 501c non-profit organizations are controlling the church. Unfortunately, it's in bed with the government. Is that true?
Well, I think it's absolutely true. And just to give people an example, a very obvious example of how this works, look at the military chaplaincy program in the United States. Now, I grew up in the American Air Force. My dad was a full colonel in the Air Force during the Cold War.
Right.
And up until the time I was enrolled in a Lutheran parochial school in Hawaii, where I started attending roots in the church were in the Protestant worship services that the United States Air Force had on the various bases where we were stationed. And in those days, I remember vividly, there were some very, very godly men from biblically oriented denominations who were preaching the traditional gospel from these military pulpits. You could go to a Sunday school and hear things that probably would be identical to what Bedros Hajian or Sam Hajian would be talking about in a Church of the Nazarene on a Sunday morning. The fact of the matter is, we now live in a world, and everyone knows it because it's international news, where the President of the United States has completely removed, without any reference whatsoever, to the Congress of the United States and the need of the Congress of the United States to modify the Code of Uniform Military Justice.
Right.
The President of the United States has unilaterally declared that open homosexuals and open lesbians can and will serve in these branches of the armed forces. And not only that, but right here in Military Town, USA, San Antonio, Texas, arguably the most military populated community in the entire United States, I have all kinds of active duty Air Force and Army people telling me off the record that their own views on this subject, and these are being inspected by superiors, and that if it is determined that they on a private basis are not totally on board with the pro-homosexual, pro-lesbian agenda, that their own careers are increasingly being put on the line. Now, this is especially true with the military chaplaincy. We have had just this year the first official homosexual wedding taking place at the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis. I saw this sickening picture on Facebook of these two male homosexuals involved in this embrace right after these so-called vows were pronounced. That's bad enough, it seems to me, where you have a society like ours and the President of the United States as the head of our secular government, basically opposing both natural law as well as what the Word of God says about this in Romans chapter 1. Now, keep in mind that American law historically, American jurisprudence historically, was based on the older British common law, which in turn made all kinds of references to Holy Scripture in it. The fact of the matter is that the the interpretation of the Constitution that we have now is that whatever the President of the United States wants to do, it seems he can do, whether it's to declare war on another country without the advice and the consent and the authorization of two houses of Congress, or arbitrarily simply to declare that we're going to have homosexuals and lesbians openly serving in the military. So when you look at the military chaplaincy, where does this put chaplains in the American military who come from denominations like the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, the Church of the Nazarene, the Southern Baptist Convention, the Independent Baptist groups, the Independent Bible Church groups that have historically had representation in this country in the military chaplaincy program? When those chaplains are ordered to attend sensitivity sessions to essentially revise their own views on homosexuality and lesbianism, and to bring them in line not with the scripture but with Barack Obama and his crowd, and Barney Frank and his crowd, and Frank Kameny, the late Jewish homosexual rights activist who was honored by Barack Obama in the Oval Office in an official ceremony in 2009. This is what we have come to where all of a sudden these military chaplains are going to be asked to choose between Christ and Caesar, and in all too many cases, they're going to choose Caesar. I think there are a few honorable ones who have quietly gotten out, but the fact of the matter is that it's not simply the fact that they are not going to be able to speak the truth from their pulpits in regard to Christian teaching on this subject, but I have no doubt the militants in the Obama administration and the militant gay agenda, as that's currently being expressed in the United States government, is going to be employed in a way where the Air Force and Army and Navy and Marine Corps chaplaincy programs are deliberately going to target these traditional evangelical clergymen and order them to perform these gay and lesbian weddings, to put them on the spot. And if they choose not, if they say that is contrary to what I believe about the Word of God and is contrary to my ordination vow, then they'll either be quietly riffed out of the military, or in a worst case scenario, could be tried under the Uniform Code of Military Justice for insubordination and court-martialed and dishonorably discharged. So this is the nature of the government we have, and it's important for people to understand that this government, and I'm not simply talking of Barack Obama and the Democratic Party, there are a lot of people in the Republican Party in high places who agree with these things as well, and in some cases are doing these things. There is a homosexual underground in the Republican Party, by the way, that is a very strong one, with a number of names that keep popping up that people would recognize if the mainstream media were to choose to cover it. But the fact of the matter is that we are moving headlong toward a Sodom and Gomorrah, headlong toward a spiritual leadership in this country that whether you look at ancient Assyria, ancient Babylon, ancient Rome, whether you're looking at the southern kingdom of Judah after the death of Josiah, this is where we are. And supposedly Christian churches that are concerned about maintaining their 501c3 tax status, or that want to continue preaching the gospel of American exceptionalism, the idea that the United States is the exception to the rule in regard to the way that God deals with empires throughout world history. That is an absolutely absurd point of view, and these folks that follow that line are going to be they're going to be confronted at the end of their lives with a very sad state of affairs, as this house of cards that we know as the United States is in the process, I believe, of both internal and external collapse. And in this regard, Pat Buchanan's book, Suicide of a Superpower, Will America Survive Until 2025, is very suggestive. If you read the chapters of that book, certain chapters especially, it's obvious that Buchanan thinks that the United States within the next decade will cease to exist in anything approaching the form that older Americans remember at all. The fact of the matter is we are on our way out. whether you look at four empires that are discussed in Daniel 2 and Daniel chapter 7 in the Old Testament that rose and fell, or whether you're looking at the very specific prophecy of Jesus directed at the southern kingdom of Judah just before his crucifixion, or we're looking at the death of the Roman Empire through the centuries that followed. The U.S. is on a very dangerous course, and I think we can be looking not for long-term disaster, but for short-term. I think Buchanan is likely to be proven right, that we're probably looking at a scenario where the United States has less than 10 years to survive.
Well, we see all these prison camps being constructions going around. Obviously, there's something bad is coming around that they're preparing when it stops existing. Let's put it this way. We don't know what's taking place, but something very bad is taking place as we speak, because we see the unfortunate, the fruits of what's taking place, basically. We see the numbness of the people, majority I'm saying, not all. Of course, there are very much awake people. We see people that are awake, some of them, but they don't understand the real true meaning behind what's taking place here prophetically. And then we see a major group that is after drugs, medications. We see all the situation that is taking place here. 60 to 70% of the people are on medication in the United States, sleeping pills or depression medication, which is proven to be right. How do you wake people up if it's not Christ? And we need a big revival right now in the United States for people to wake up, because without that, no one is going to wake up. Without that, everybody's going to keep sleeping, especially now what's taking place in Middle East, which is directly connected to what has taken place here for years.
Well, there's no question about it, and just on this drug issue alone, I think you're hitting upon something that's very, very important. We're not talking about so-called illegal drugs at this juncture. Now, right. we have spoken to that up to now in regard to those who are involved with the illegal drug industry, but the so-called legal drug industry run by big pharma, the big pharmaceuticals, and their relationship with the medical and psychiatric establishment of the United States has resulted in a situation where millions of Americans are bummed out on legal medications being routinely prescribed for them, and for a variety of alleged psychological and emotional problems that in many cases have a very deep-seated spiritual reason for being, and that have everything to do with some type of demonic oppression that has taken place in their lives in the particular culture that they're living in. And it's fascinating to watch this, because some years ago I was a chaplain, and was a chaplain in a retirement community while I was in graduate school. And in those days, this was taking place in another part of the United States from the one that I'm in now, but it was very apparent that in the direction that things were moving in with this particular company, that although there were some things that were on paper in regard to the chaplaincy program and what the chaplains were supposed to be doing, what they were supposed to believe at a bare minimum, and all of these other things, I felt very strongly that the biblical basis for that particular chaplaincy program was being slowly but surely removed from the scene in favor of the idea that chaplains, they can maybe wear a black shirt and a white collar or something that identifies them as clergy, quote unquote. But the biblical witness and the law and gospel sin and salvation model is no longer in vogue. All of a sudden, the chaplains in these types of facilities, in these types of ministries, are increasingly expected to be psychiatric social workers and to be far more conversant with Sigmund Freud and Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers and all of these other secular psychologists and psychiatrists than they are with the Word of God. And when you add to that all of these so-called depression medications that Big Pharma is tossing around north, south, east, and west all over the place, it goes a long way toward explaining the passivity of the public in regard to being awake when it comes to understanding what their government is really doing and to understanding what is really going on with the so-called New World Order. The other thing that constantly amazes me, and I know that you own firearms and I own firearms as well legally, that every time there's a gun incident in this country that involves an atrocity, a mass shooting, this globalist news media always wants to emphasize the guns and emphasize disarming the public and reducing their opportunity in the United States to exercise their so-called Second Amendment rights. Not only do I believe that to be deliberate and dangerous, but there's another thing that's conveniently being ignored, and that is that virtually all of the people, and the American Free Press has run a series of stories on this in recent years out of Washington, D.C., the vast percentage, almost to a person, of the individuals that have committed these terrible crimes with these firearms, killing mass numbers of people for no reason whatsoever, these are people with so-called psychological and psychiatric problems that the biblical Christian is quite likely to diagnose in terms of demon influence and demon possession. And then when you look at these drugs that are being given to these people, these are called SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. In many cases, what the secular psychologist or psychiatrist calls psychosis, and what the biblical Christian is quite likely to say is in fact evidence of demon influence or demon possession, these symptoms are in the vast percentage of cases exacerbated by these drugs. And so these people running around on these college campuses and running around in neighborhoods, running around in movie theaters, shooting all kinds of people to death without context or reason whatsoever, are inevitably people that I believe are under some kind of demonic influence, and in 99% of the cases have had their serious spiritual issues, which are reflected in emotional and mental health issues, exacerbated by the very drugs, these selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, that the medical and psychiatric establishment tells us are the solution. They're not the solution. They're not the answer. They're a big part of the problem in conjunction with the other things that go into this, which is largely, which are largely the product of a Christless society, and a society where the occult is increasingly involved in these types of things when you start looking into the backgrounds of these people more deeply that have committed these crimes. And of course, this gets back to what you were talking about earlier in Southern California at SeaWorld and at Disney and elsewhere, where with the latest revelations about these child pornography and perversion rings, you can take this to the house that virtually in every instance there is a major occult going on in all of this. There is cultic involvement on the part of the people involved in these perversions, and that goes hand in hand with what we've seen in the proliferation of these gun crimes in the United States.
Well, you absolutely hit right on the target to some of the points you made, right on the target. Absolutely, not many people will talk this bluntly and specifically. But thank you for being honest and speaking outright what's taking place, because a true Christian that stands for Christ would speak out the truth, what's taking place in the unseen world that we're going through right now, in the unseen world that is taking place, the control of mind, the attack on the human mind that is taking place right now in order to control, completely revise it and make it slave for their mission, basically. And this again comes all the way from biblical prophecy and the word of Christ. It's a big war that is taking right now place between dark forces of Satan and light forces of Christ himself, and we see it right evident in our eyes. So I'm going to go back again to country of Middle East, the territory of Middle East, because Syria, as we speak, is cut off from all water. We know that, and I'm sure you can phrase some of the biblical verses about the lake of Euphrates and lake of Arax that is going to be dried, and war. It's a premeditation of war. Can you emphasize on that?
Well, in terms of what's going on in Syria, I find it fascinating that the Turkish regime of Erdogan has an awful lot to do with this. And of course, I think that that's an area where Bedros Hajian would be far more articulate than Mark Dankof would be in psychoanalyzing the Turkish mind and Mr. Erdogan's mind specifically. But the fact of the matter is that when you look at this whole issue of water, and the drying up of water in areas that are biblically significant, this is all a part of the master plan. How does the New World Order gain power? Well, we've talked about some of this tonight. There's central banking, and of course central banking has the disproportionate influence of the synagogue of Satan, Revelation 2:9 and Revelation 3:9. The petrodollar is involved in this. Richard Nixon's agreement with the Saudi Arabians in August of 1971, where the Saudi monarchy and these other Sunni regimes in the Gulf become critical to helping the United States maintain supremacy of the dollar as the reserve currency of the world. So this is why there is such an inexplicable alliance of the Zionists on the one hand, and many of these evil Sunni regimes on the other. So there you have it. There you're dealing with world currency. You've touched upon this in terms of oil and natural gas, and oil and natural gas pipelines. And certainly for anyone who even follows this on Facebook, you start looking at these maps where some of the better sources in that part of the world are putting up these stories about these oil and natural gas pipelines and agreements between specific nations, and where these pipelines begin and where they end and so forth. This is very, very much linked to the whole question of how the Antichrist is going to control the world economy. It's simply controlling global currency. He will do that, certainly, but it's about controlling, in this case, energy, oil and natural gas, and controlling the routes of these pipelines so that whoever this individual is, he will be able to basically turn on and turn off energy supply to whomever he so chooses at any time that he chooses.
Yes,
the
because
Syrian situation regarding water is paramount on this too. The Middle Eastern conflict has as much to do with water and the control of water resources as it does oil. And
it's very important to one more time emphasize all these pipelines that are directed to go from one place all the way to Israel. What's in Israel, a small country that we need to understand or that we need to really worry about? It's very, very important to find out prophetic word that the Antichrist that is going to be supposed Christ, pretend to be Christ, is going to sit in the middle of the temple and claim to be Christ himself. And this is what's really taking place right now. And when we talk about economical grudge or hold, the whole United States is controlled by their economy, one or two people's economy, because it's a loan that they've given from 1913. So what happens when they pull all their money? Again, it's going to be controlled from the same temple. So this is the pre-organization or preparing the way of Antichrist, let's put it this way. And we see it in front of our eyes. We talked about today very essential information, Middle East versus United States. United States, it's a numb society, ways they numb people. What takes place in Vegas, nobody knows, nobody even heard of probably, or if we say something, they will think that we're conspiracy theorists, and same thing, they would have said something like that in Disney or SeaWorld or all these places that they take their children, perverted society, perverted comical figures to have fun with the kids. Of course, most parents don't know anything about it. So, it boils down to the verse in Matthew when Satan took Christ up on the hill and said, all these kingdoms, all these riches are mine. If you bow in front of me, I will give it to you. So basically, the control was set 2,000 years ago. Satan took on the hill, on the Mount Hill, and told him, all this belongs to me. So it's a prophetic word that he already gave to us. And it's going to be controlled from the center. Unfortunately, we're seeing the truth coming out to be. How prepared are we as Christians? How are we going to face this reality when it happens, which is happening right now? One morning, we can all wake up and go to bank to pick up money, and they're going to tell us, you don't have money in the bank. Because it's their paper, not ours. So I'm sure you're going to agree with that one too.
Well, there's no question about it. Just let me say a couple of things that illustrate the points you've been making, Bedros. One, as it relates to oil and natural gas control, the American war effort in Afghanistan is largely based, in my view, not simply on a policy of encircling Iran, which is what Benjamin Netanyahu wants us to do. Encircling Iran is all about trying to replace the Iranian regime with one that is malleable to the ultimate interests of the Zionist entity and the so-called New World Order. It's also about oil and natural gas pipelines running from these Stan countries around the Caspian Sea all the way through Afghanistan to the ocean. So having a means of utilizing Afghanistan in this regard is very clear. And if people go back and take a look at this, even prior to the American invasion of Afghanistan, they'll see that all the evidence on this is unmistakable. As it relates to all of this sexual perversion going on, I can't think of a better microcosm to illustrate what we're talking about tonight than Sheldon Adelson, the owner of the Sands Casino in Las Vegas. He's a Zionist Jew. He is a rabid Zionist Jew who has even publicly advocated the use of preemptive nuclear weapon strikes against Iran. He is on a first-name basis, pick up the phone and call him immediately basis with Benjamin Netanyahu. And of course, when we look at the $100 million that Sheldon Adelson put into the last Republican presidential campaigns of Newt Gingrich and Mitt Romney, that's certainly instructive as well. But then look at what the Wall Street Journal had to say about Mr. Adelson's adjunct casino in Macau. You know, there were some stories that came out and then all of a sudden were being suppressed that were in the Wall Street Journal initially, talking about the Chinese concerns on Macau, about the amount of stuff going on at Adelson's Sands Casino in Macau that involved a lot more than gambling, that involved drugs and prostitution. And this was all in the Wall Street Journal. If people search this online, maybe some of these stories will still come up. But there you have a very interesting intersection in this one individual. Gambling, drugs, prostitution, and major league financial campaigns to pro-Zionist presidential political candidates in the United States, and someone who has a view of Israel which suggests that he shares the view of the most radical Zionists, that the present modern state of Israel should control the territory from the Nile River to the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and that Israel should have a totally rebuilt temple on the Temple Mount. All of that fits in with biblical prophecy in 2 Thessalonians 2,
Absolutely.
as we've been talking about it tonight. And there is this very interesting figure sitting in Las Vegas, Nevada, who is a major player in all of this and who intersects with all of these trends that we are talking about tonight. I think that that's something, just as one example, that can only be understood by those who have a biblical, prophetic, eschatological line on what's going on.
Well, Mark, I think our time is almost at the end. I will explain a few words in Armenian But thank you for coming on our show and giving your inputs specifically and right on the target as always. Thank you very much. And I know we are going to continue with these interviews because you're one of the individuals that is outspoken in the American community and speaks right to the target. Thank you very much for being here.
God bless. I look forward to seeing you in Texas, and I look forward to hearing this one on YouTube if it makes it up that far.
I will be in Texas in August. That's for sure.
Sounds good. I will see you then.
Thank you.
you.
Սիրելի հայրենակիցներ, ինչպես եղբայրներ, քույրեր, ինչպես այսօր լսեցինք, այս կարևոր հաղորդաշարը Մարկ Դենքոֆի հետ, շատ կարևոր հաղորդաշարները մեկն էր, որ պետք է բոլորս իմանայինք ինչ կգադարվի որ աշխարհի շուրջը, մարգարեական խոսքի, գիտեմ որ անգլերենով էր, մարգարեական խոսքի իրականությունները այսօր կգադարվի որ մեր շուրջը, լա Ամերիկայի մեջ, լա Միջին Արևելքի մեջ, ես կուզեմ մեկ խոսքով բացատրել եւ վերջացնել այդ վերջի գազմվածքը, այսօր կուզենք որ վերականգնեցնել Հագա Քրիստոսի տաճարը, որ այսօր բոլոր քրիստոնյաները գիտեն, բայց չեն խոսիր շատերը դժբախտաբար, ժամանակ եկա որ մեր աչքերը փանանք եւ տեսնանք ինչ կգադարվի որ այս pipeline-ներու պատերազմը որ կգադարվի մեկ երկրի միջոցով, մեկ դաջարի միջոցով պիտի կառավարվի այդ բոլոր pipeline-ները եւ աշխարհի economy-ն անդեղ են պիտի կառավարվի ուրեմն պետք է արթուն լանք եւ տեսնանք ինչ կգադարվի որ մեր շուրջը որովհետեւ իմ ժամս վերջացավ միջև քաշապատ ասված ցես հետ